Now, it would appear that police officers were indeed involved in the robbery of 72 million shillings.
But when I got that information that he had been shot,
on September 7th, 2019, Kenya's Directorate of Criminal Investigations made a major announcement. Detectives had arrested police constables Chris Ayienda and Vincent Owuor. They said they had recovered millions of shillings in cash and a Subaru Forester, believed to have been bought using proceeds from a 72 million shillings Standard Chartered Bank robbery. But there was one problem. According to Vincent's own mother, her son was never a cop.
Yeye siku gani alishakuwa na bunduki na yeye siku gani alikuwa polisi? Kwa kijana yangu hajawahi kuwa polisi kwa maisha yake. Yeye ni mwenye anatafuta kivyake na anapata hiyo kidogo.
So who exactly was Wycliffe Vincent Owuor? How did a man who wasn't a police officer convince almost everyone that he was? And why did his story end with a leaked execution video that appeared to contradict the official police account? For years, Vincent lived as a police officer. In the end, the question wasn't whether he had fooled the public, it was whether he had fooled the police, too. Welcome to Dark Hour Docs. This is the tragic story of Wycliffe Vincent Owuor, better known as Vinny. For years, Wycliffe Vincent Owuor lived a life that wasn't his. If you had crossed paths with him in Nairobi in 2019, you probably would have mistaken him for a police officer. And that was exactly what he wanted, because just like Joshua Waigenjo, he was an imposter posing as a cop. He lived in Kayole, yet carried himself like an administration police officer attached to the Special Police Intervention Unit, better known as SPIV, based at Spring Valley. He even introduced himself using a service number, 101427. There was little reason to doubt him, as he wore police uniforms, carried police equipment, and looked like a man who belonged in the service. It was during this double life that Vincent met another ambitious criminal who, just like himself, was another police imposter in the area. This was police imposter Chris Ayienda, with whom he would share a plan to carry out a possible 200 million shillings heist. The two men shared more than just confidence, but a willingness to exploit the police uniform, and without any hesitation, they began assembling a team capable of pulling off a robbery that was almost unimaginable. In the months leading to the start of September, they had successfully recruited an insider at G4S headquarters, a taxi driver, and several rogue police officers. And for 5 months straight, they planned in silence, patiently studying routines and waiting for the right moment to pounce. That opportunity arrived sooner than they expected. On the morning of September 5th, 2019, after nearly 5 months of planning, the phone call that Vincent had been waiting for finally came. The group's insider had delivered information critical in setting the heist in motion. 2 G4S cash transit vans were preparing to leave the company's headquarters in Nairobi's industrial area. Their assignment was routine: escort millions of shillings to Standard Chartered Bank Nairobi West branch to replenish its ATMs before the city fully came alive. For Vincent and his team, this wasn't just another cash delivery. It was the opportunity they had spent months preparing for. Before sunrise, Vincent and 2 accomplices arrived at the G4S headquarters dressed in full administration police uniforms. Aside from that, they also came with an official escort vehicle, looking exactly like the officers assigned to accompany the cash convoy. Then came the moment that would determine whether the illusion they had carefully built would survive. As the names of the officers assigned to the escort were called out, Vincent and his team answered without hesitation. No one realized that the real officers had not even arrived. And at exactly 6 a.m., the convoy rolled out of the industrial area and headed towards Nairobi West. Inside were millions of shillings destined to our bank ATMs across Nairobi, and alongside them sat men believed to be protecting the cash. Meanwhile, another member of the operation had already taken position beyond the G4S headquarters. A white Toyota Noah, number plate KCH, waited quietly near the Standard Chartered ATM in Nairobi West. This car would be used as the first getaway vehicle after the robbery, alongside another Toyota Voxy vehicle, KCE. So, when the convoy reached the bank, everything unfolded exactly as it had on countless mornings before. The unsuspecting G4S personnel unlocked the ATM vaults and contacted headquarters for the authorization code required to begin loading the cash into the machines. Then, everything changed. The escorts, Vincent and his crew, suddenly turned their guns on them, and as if to try and mock them, one of the robbers shouted, "Surprise!" And within seconds, the routine operation had become an armed robbery. Caught completely off guard, the G4S personnel had little choice but to comply. The robbers transferred the cash into 13 bags, rushed into the waiting Toyota Noah, and disappeared. The robbery lasted only a matter of minutes, with no shots being fired and no blood was spilled. Yet by the time the Toyota Noah disappeared from Nairobi, approximately 72 million shillings had disappeared with it. Ironically, the gang had originally hoped to steal over 200 million shillings, and they had fallen well short of their target. Back at G4S headquarters along Witu Road, the real police officers assigned to the escort had only just reported for duty. Confused, they were informed that another team had collected the assignment. But before anything else, an urgent call came in. They were told that the cash convoy had been robbed, and only then did they realize that the escorts were not actual police officers.
Police officers were indeed involved in the robbery of 72 million shillings at the Standard Chartered Bank's Nairobi West ATM.
And for a brief moment, Vincent's illusion had successfully defeated the system. But it would not stay that way for long, because while the gang disappeared with millions of shillings into the early morning, detectives had already begun putting the pieces together. The perfect robbery lasted only a few minutes, but its saddening aftermath would last for years. With millions of shillings in their possession, Vincent and his crew knew the first rule of surviving a major heist is to disappear. So the gang regrouped at the Subaru Forester in Kiambu, where they divided the loot. They remained focused, and there was no celebration or any time to argue. Each man grabbed a bag of cash and disappeared in a different direction before detectives could close in. This had been a smartly planned escape, but what happened next would be very foolish. Money has a way of changing people, because almost overnight, the discipline that the robbers had taken 5 months to build began to disappear. Instead of keeping a low profile, Vincent and Chris Ayienda walked into a car dealership in Nairobi the same day of the heist and bought a red Subaru Forester worth 1.5 million shillings in cash. After buying the vehicle, they packed their shares of the loot into the car and took the highway towards their upcountry homes. Their first stop would be at Kisii, where Chris dropped off 4 million shillings at his house. Vincent later drove alone, and the second stop was in Kendu Bay, where he hid his 3 million shilling share. But investigators were hot on their trail, with the first breakthrough coming on the next day after the robbery on September 6th. On that day, a member of the public reported suspicious boxes that had been abandoned inside the Subaru Forester. When detectives arrived, they discovered 13 empty cash boxes, matching those from the scene of the robbery.
Katika msitu wa Thogoto ambaye ni kama kilomita 8 kutoka katika kituo cha polisi chetu, waliweza kuona vitu imetapakaa kama ya kubeba pesa. Akasema yeye hakujua ni nini. Ndiposa maafisa wetu walikimbia katika hiyo area, wakapata mifuko 13.
This evidence now shifted the trail to Kiambu. That same evening, detectives raided Owuor garage in Kikuyu, where the white Toyota Noah, believed to have ferried the stolen money, was undergoing a makeover. The car was already being repainted to black and undergoing a number plate change. It instantly became evidence as the getaway vehicle, and the entire garage crew was arrested to provide further information on the heist.
Siku ya pili kwa hiyo gari kukua kwa garage, na saa hiyo siku ya pili jioni tulistuka tu watu wameingia kwa garage na wakaanza tu kuuliza maswali.
Tuliza nani ako na gari, tukamwambia ni huyo jamaa mwenye ameshikwa sasa hivi.
The next destination for the officers would be Kisii. Chris Ayienda was arrested at his home with millions of shillings in cash. And since he was faced with overwhelming evidence, he cooperated. He led detectives to Seiko Village in Kendu Bay, where Vincent had been waiting. The two intended to escape to Uganda, but Vincent never got the chance. Chris was arrested with 4 million shillings and Vincent 3 million shillings in cash.
Administration Police Constable Chris Ayienda Machogu in handcuffs. He is one of the latest suspects to be arrested over the 72 million shillings robbery.
During his arrest, Chris had also written a letter on Facebook telling money that it was playing hard to get. For the police, capturing the two masterminds should have marked the end of the story, but it did not. Instead, it began another mystery as more than 50 million shillings was still missing and no one knew where it had gone. Police officers were also dragged into the investigation. Among those arrested were Constables Simon Karuku and Caroline Waithera, a husband and wife whom detectives believed had benefited from the robbery. Simon led investigators to a Kenya Defense Forces officer serving at Kahawa Barracks. This was his sister, Eunice, who linked them to another cop known as Florence. Days later, a white Mark X, believed to have been bought using proceeds from the robbery, was seized at Eunice's home. However, with every arrest, the circle grew wider. And what had begun as a robbery was beginning to expose a network that stretched far beyond two men wearing stolen uniforms. The DCI had charged Vincent Owuor, Chris Ayienda, Duncan, Boniface, Alexander, and Francis. Alongside them were G4S employees Musa Rajab, Abraham Wangi, Oscar Kemunto, Winfred, Nathan, and Dabmark, several of who were insiders. One G4S officer had been arrested in Ruiru, where he had hidden 1 million shillings in his mother's cowshed. Both he and his mother were arrested. The suspects denied the allegations, and the robbers claimed that detectives had tortured them in an attempt to force confessions. Despite the seriousness of the charges, the court granted them bond as the case proceeded.
6 suspects, including 3 police officers, arrested over the 72 million shillings heist. They were released on a 1 million shillings bond amid claims they were tortured by police who interrogated them. The suspects claimed in court that police suffocated them with plastic bags and forced them to state where the stolen cash was from.
On paper, the getaway vehicle had been recovered. The 13 empty cash boxes, millions of shillings, the masterminds, and the insiders. This should have been the end of one of Kenya's most audacious cash robberies, but it wasn't, because as investigators appeared to be getting closer to the truth, the most important suspect would be eliminated in broad daylight. March 24th, 2020. The body of a man surfaced at Nairobi City Mortuary. He had been shot multiple times and was later identified as Vincent Owuor. This was just 7 months after he had become a central suspect in the 72 million shillings G4S heist. Before this, the police had repeatedly lied and pushed the narrative that Vincent was a police officer, but he wasn't.
Kuingia kwa tuko, story yote nasema polisi wawili.
Yeye siku gani alishakuwa na bunduki na yeye siku gani alikuwa polisi? Kwa kijana yangu hajawahi kuwa polisi kwa maisha yake.
And according to police, Vincent had been killed during a fierce shootout after officers foiled yet another robbery. They claimed he was armed, that 2 other accomplices escaped on a motorcycle, and that weapons had been recovered at the scene. However, the people of Kayole witnessed something different, and the story by the police was not straightforward. Vincent had spent the previous hour at his sister's home, and then his phone rang. A woman known to him asked to meet him at around 1 p.m. and he left. He never came back. His relatives would later say Vincent had spent months living in fear. After being released on bond, he had received repeated threats warning him to leave Kayole or be killed. He temporarily moved away with his mother before eventually returning. And on the day he died, Vincent wasn't planning a robbery and had simply stepped out to buy milk. A leaked footage, together with witnesses' statements, placed 3 men in plain clothes near where he was killed. They were heard arguing, and then moments later, gunshots rang out. Vincent was publicly executed in plain daylight. There was no exchange of fire, no robbery, and no fleeing motorcycle. Some witnesses even claimed Vincent called out the name of the officer who shot him before collapsing. Police would later record the incident at Kayole Police Station on OB 47 as the fatal shooting of an unknown suspect. Yet when his body reached Nairobi City Mortuary, it had already been registered under Vincent Owuor's full name. The contradictions did not end there. A post-mortem found that Vincent had been shot at close range at least 6 times at crucial areas of the body, which ruled out a shootout. Had Vincent become a liability? By then, detectives had already arrested serving police officers and insider G4S employees. Had Vincent known who else was involved and capable of exposing more names? Even his Subaru Forester, seized during the investigation, became another source of controversy. After police alleging that it was initially bought using the stolen money and took it, a senior police officer in the same station was seen using the vehicle frequently. However, Vincent's family insisted they had owned it long before the heist through their second-hand clothing business and a bar. The vehicle would eventually be returned to them by the court.
Gari ilikuwa yetu ya kitambo. Gari nayo ilikuwa yetu. Na kona 2, hata moja hiyo ingine bado inafanya.
More than 6 years later, the greatest mystery is no longer how Vincent impersonated a police officer and carried out the heist. It is about what he knew of the 72 million shillings, because the money stolen that September morning has never been recovered. And if Vincent truly knew where it went and who was involved, the answer may have died with him. 6 cops were arrested 2 years after the video surfaced and were charged with the murder of Vincent. So Vincent was lured, he had no gun, and he happened to mention an officer by the name of Vin who had been threatening him. There was no way he had gone to the area where his sister lived to commit a robbery, as the cops claimed. Vincent was executed. It would seem Vincent's killers planned his execution to silence him after failing to drive him out of Kayole. This has been Dark Hour Docs, and thank you for watching.